Hi, I'm Casey, and today we're going to make Portobello Dip Sandwiches, which are kind of a vegetarian version of a Philly cheesesteak and a French dip sandwich. It's made with portobello mushrooms and bell peppers and yellow onions, and it's served with a really rich, wonderful au jus. So here we go. To get started, we're going to make a really awesome garlic bread that serves as the base for the sandwiches. So I have just picked up a La Brea baguette. I've played around using baguettes from bakeries, but sometimes they're a little too firm on the outside, and this one seems to work really well for this recipe, but feel free to experiment with your local bakery's baguette or different kinds of bread, but this is my favorite for this recipe. So we're just going to take our baguette and slice it open down the middle. And I find it's easier, it's probably really dangerous, but I find it's easier to cut it this way so I can keep the slicing even. For some reason that's easier for me than cutting it when it's down flat. And these are open face sandwiches, and I usually cut about 4 pieces out of this one baguette, which gives you 8 small open face sandwiches, but they're really filling. So you'll just cut them into like 4 sections. And now we'll make the delicious garlic paste. So I've just put the baguette with the cut side up on a cookie sheet and set it aside until we have our garlic mixture put together here. So we're going to start with some garlic, obviously. We're just going to take a couple of large cloves. If they're not really large, use 3, because you want this to be really garlicky. And just give them a whack with the flat side of your knife, and then we'll just mince them up really quickly. So now we have our garlic cloves really finely minced. You want to make sure it's really fine. You don't want a lot of big chunks in this. And we'll just transfer that to our bowl. And to that I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of melted butter. Give that a quick stir. And we're going to add to that a 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. Measurements don't have to be totally perfect on this. And 3/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, and you can use grated or shredded, whatever you have on hand. There we go. And just mix it all together really well. And I used grated this time. I usually buy shredded, and it's a little dry, so I'm going to add a tiny bit more mayonnaise because you want it to be just easy to spread. Perfect. And then really quickly, I'm just going to mince about a tablespoon of Italian parsley. Perfect. Then we'll mix that up and smear it on our garlic bread. So now we have our garlic, mayonnaise, butter, and cheese mixture here. And we're just going to spread it in a nice thick layer onto the cut side of the garlic bread. Okay, so I'm just finishing up the last piece of garlic bread. And finally, the last thing I like to do is sprinkle just a tiny bit of paprika onto the tops of the garlic bread so that when we pop it in the oven under the broiler, it gets really nice and golden. This just helps give it color. It doesn't really add a ton of flavor, so if you don't have it on hand, don't worry about it. And this garlic bread is really great for this particular recipe, but we make it all the time to go with soups and stews and pastas, and I probably make it a little too often, to be honest. So there we go, and we'll just set this aside until we're ready to put it under the broiler. So now that our garlic bread is set aside, we're going to start by making the base for the au jus. And what you're going to need for that is a quart of vegetable broth. I really love the Trader Joe's organic low sodium broth, but I didn't have any, so this is my second favorite, which is just the Pacific organic vegetable broth. So we're going to use a whole quart because it reduces a little bit while it simmers for about 20 minutes. And to that, you're going to add about 4 tablespoons of low sodium soy sauce. And you can eyeball it or measure it, whatever you're comfortable with. So we're just going to set that aside, and I forgot to mention before that you want to make sure your saucepan has a lid that fits. So now we're going to take our portobello mushrooms and clean them just using a wet paper towel. You don't actually want to submerge them in water, or they'll absorb a lot of it and taste kind of bland and watery, which obviously isn't what you want. So just give them a good scrub and get the dirt off. And next we're going to pop the stems off, and these stems are particularly dirty, and you don't actually want to eat the stems because they're really woodsy and sort of thick. So I'm just going to trim off this part that's really dirty and make sure there's no like big clumps of dirt on them. Perfect. So now really quickly we're just going to roughly cut these into large chunks and toss them here into the saucepan, and that's going to give the au jus a lot of flavor. Perfect. So I'm just going to put the lid on this and put this on the stove over medium-low heat, and it'll come up to a simmer, and I'm just going to leave it like that while we cook the rest of the dish. So really quickly, I'm just going to take our portobello mushrooms and thinly slice them, and you want them pretty thin because they're going to cook down a lot. You don't want huge chunks of them in your sandwich, so I like to cut them as thin as I can. Just give them a quick slice. There we go. So I'm just going to transfer all of the mushrooms to a small bowl and set them aside here for a second while we slice up our bell peppers and onions. So I'm going to take our bell peppers, and I just like to slice them down the back and pull them open and discard the seeds and any of like the large white sort of veins from the inside. They just seem kind of spongy. And we're just going to slice these really thinly, sort of about the same that we did with the mushrooms. We want to keep all of the veggies consistent. So just nice thin slices. So I put our bell peppers aside in a separate bowl from the mushrooms because we're going to cook them separately. And now I'm just going to slice up our onions. So I'll just start by slicing off both ends. Flip it onto a flat side. Cut it in half. And peel off the skin on both halves here. And then again, we're just going to thinly slice it. And we'll do that with both the onions. Just finish up this last onion and we'll be ready to cook our ingredients. So I'm going to turn on our stovetop here to just over medium, and I'm going to put a good amount of olive oil in our non-stick skillet. The mushrooms absorb a lot of oil, so you might even have to keep adding it, but it's good fat. Okay, and we'll just toss these into the pan here. And we'll just let them saute and brown until they're completely done and caramelized and tender. So our mushrooms have been sauteing for about 7 minutes now, and they're almost done. You can see how beautiful and golden they're getting. We want them all to look like that. So now I'm just going to season them with a small pinch of salt and a little bit of freshly ground black pepper. And we'll give them a couple more minutes here in the pan before we set them aside. Okay, so our mushrooms are definitely done, and I'm just going to transfer them back to the bowl here. And I did have to add a bit more olive oil, but that's fine, it adds a ton of flavor. So I'm just going to put a smidge of oil in here. And we're going to add in all of our onions and bell peppers. And we're just going to let these cook down for a while. So our mushrooms and bell peppers have been sauteing here for about 10 minutes over medium-high heat. I'm just going to turn it down a little bit because they're starting to brown, which is what we want. And I'm also going to season this with a little bit of freshly ground black pepper and a pinch of salt. I really like to flavor every layer of the dish with just a pinch of salt and pepper rather than adding a bunch at one specific time, because I really think it makes a big difference in the overall flavor and helps keep the seasoning more accurate. So we're going to give this maybe another 4 minutes on the stove. Okay, so our bell peppers and onions are all nice and brown with a little bit of char on them. They're perfect. So we're going to add our mushrooms back, and make sure you get any oil and juices that have kind of accumulated in the bottom of the bowl. And we'll toss these all together, and this is still over medium heat right now. And over here, we've had our dip bean sauce, which has been simmering with the stems from the portobello mushrooms now for almost half an hour. And we're going to pour that through a strainer directly in with our other veggies. And now you can discard these. But save your strainer in the saucepan. So we're just going to let this simmer and let the broth soak up all the good flavor in here for a couple of minutes. So now's the time when you're going to want to preheat your broiler. So we're going to get our garlic bread going. Our oven broiler's been preheating for a minute, and I'm just going to pop our garlic bread in here. So our sauce has been simmering with the veggies here for a few minutes, and our garlic bread's in the broiler. I'm going to turn off the heat, and then using tongs or a slotted spoon, I'm just going to transfer the veggies to a bowl, letting the excess sauce drip off there. So I've gotten most of the veggies here out of the pan, and when there's just a few left, I'm going to take a saucepan and a strainer and just carefully pour the sauce back into the saucepan. And then these veggies will just get added to the bowl over here. So now we have a really rich, thick au jus to go with our sandwiches. So now our garlic bread, I've just pulled it from the oven. It's really nice and golden and bubbly. And we're just going to top each piece with a little bit of the veggies and just make sure every slice gets some really good mushrooms and bell pepper and onions. A little bit of everything. So all of our breads are now topped with the veggies, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of veggies left. This definitely is enough for 2 meals or a meal and a leftover. So if you wanted to, you could cut the veggies in half, but I guarantee you're going to want the leftovers. And there's also a lot of the sauce left in here, so you can pour that into the saucepan as well. So now we're just going to take a little bit of mozzarella cheese that's been shredded and sprinkle it on top of each piece. And you don't need a lot, but it does add a nice bubbly, cheesy layer to these open-faced sandwiches. So I'm going to put this on each piece, and then we're going to pop it back in the broiler. So each of our little sandwiches has a little bit of cheese on top, and now I'm going to top them again with a pinch of paprika, which is optional. And then we're just going to get these in the broiler until the cheese is melted and golden, and then we're ready to eat. Here we go. So I've just pulled these out of the oven, and they're just starting to turn golden brown and bubbly. So now you can turn your oven off, and just get one of these plated. So good. So now we have the sauce, and you can pour it straight over the top or around the sides. And there you have it. Now we're ready to eat. So now Gwyneth's back to help me with the wine and beer pairings for this dish. So first, from Everybody's Brewing, I have the Daily Bread Common Ale. And I chose this one specifically because it has a really nice caramel flavor and a fairly strong Northwest hop profile, but it's not overpowering. It doesn't fight with any of the flavors in the food. It's really refreshing, and it's a great match for this dish. And then from Springhouse Cellars, I have their Sauvignon Blanc, and I thought it was going to be a real challenge to find a white wine that would pair with this dish because it's really earthy and rich and flavorful, and I was afraid that some white wines just wouldn't pair well with it. And I went down to Springhouse and was totally surprised by this wine. It's wonderful. It's got a lot of pear flavor, it's a lot of fruit, but it's also really bright and acidic, so it actually helps to break up the richness of the dish, and I was really surprised by that one. And then finally, for the red wine, I have the Syrah, the 2010 Syrah from Cerulean. And this wine isn't out yet, but it will be very soon. And I highly recommend you go grab a bottle when they release it. It has such great cherry and plum flavors and was so smooth. It completely knocked my socks off. I'm not normally a huge fan of Syrah, so I was totally surprised and I'm in love with this wine. And now we're ready to try some food. Get you a nice cheesy bite. And some dip. Here you go. What'd you think? It smells so good. This is one of my favorite dinners. I really hope you take a chance and make it. I'm gonna be really happy. See you next time. And say see you soon. Bye.